We'll try again with this.
So shall I start, or?
Yes, go ahead and start. And I'll just, it'll catch up to you. Or you'll catch up to it, one or two.
Charge ki jai, Advaita Saptami ki jai. So it's nice to be with you on this auspicious occasion. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And I'll begin with a thought and or comment. I was asked recently, what is the benefit of observing this day that commemorates the appearance of Advaita Acharya? And I found the question to be a bit off-putting, because my thought is more that Advaita Acharya is such a great personality. We love him. We should speak about him, glorify him, take advantage of the opportunity to try to do justice to his contribution to our sampradaya, rather than be concerned with what our benefit might be from observing the day. So we're blessed, yes, to have the opportunity to glorify him. And for to begin, he, of course, is a very significant figure amongst Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's associates. He hailed from West Bengal. Sometime early in his childhood, his family moved to Shantipur, which became his main residence. And he appeared in the world about 50 years, I believe, or so, prior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he remained in the world about maybe 25 years after the passing of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he was in the world for a long time, maybe close to 125 years. And of course, again, his contribution is significant. In his youth, he exhibited many divine powers, which caused his family and associates and those who were privy to those extraordinary activities to ponder who he was, where he was from, what was he was of some type of divine or more than human nature, and the specifics of that were questioned in the minds of many. And at some point, it would seem that during the journey of Madhavendra Puri from Vrindavan, to which culminated in Orissa, at the feet of Chirchor Gopinath, where he had traveled and ventured in pursuit of sandalwood to bring back to Vrindavan to turn into a paste and anoint his deity there, his Gopal deity. That in that journey, passing through Bengal, Advaita met him and was initiated by him. So Advaita Acharya received his mantra diksha from Madhavendra Puri. As a number of the elders in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela did as well. And after his initiation, sometime afterwards, he also visited Vrindavan and spent some time there. And the most well-known event that occurred in his life at that time was some type of discovery, finding of the Madan Mohan Deity. Madan Mohan Deity is one of the famous deities of Vrindavan, one of the three principal deities of Vrindavan, along with Gopinath and Govindaji, mentioned by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, praised as the principal deities of Braj. Madan Mohan, among them, of course, gave the blessing to Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami to write Chaitanya Charitamrita, or confirmed further the that the desire of the assembled Vaishnavas that he do so was indeed his own will. Very famous, important deity of Vrindavan, and apparently, according to the Gaudiya history, that deity was originally crafted by the grandson of Krishna, as were the other three, Govindaji and Gopinath. And as is the case, probably more often than not, the deity's worship, it appears to have been suspended at some point, or he was hidden at some point, perhaps to avoid the adversarial and offensive attitude towards the Hindus on the part of the Mughals. And at any rate, how he got there, we don't know exactly, but it's said that Advaita, at Advaita Vat, which is now called under a great banyan tree, found the deity of Madan Gopal, Madan Mohan, and worshipped him there. This is in geographically speaking, in terms of sacred geography, this is near the place where Krishna chastised Kaliya, jumped from the Kadamba tree and converted him actually into a Vaishnav. Afterwards, he ascended to a nearby hill there and was basked in the sun and dried out from his swimming adventures, manifesting as he did his Matsya abilities in terms of dealing with Matsya Avatar, in terms of dealing with Kaliya. And on that hill, Dvadasaditya Tila, it is called, where the Adityas came and manifested like suns and dried him off, is where this banyan tree is found, Advaita Vat, and where, as I say, Advaita found Madan Mohan, who in a dream then told him that he wanted to be placed in the hands of a Brahmin in Mathura and worshipped suitably in a temple. So with some feelings of separation, but nonetheless obedience to the will of the deity, Advaita made the transfer and later of the worship and departed, it would seem, back to Bengal. And later, of course, it was Sanatana Goswami who came to Vrindavan at the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and in a dream that Brahman was told in Mathura to give the deity to Sanatana Goswami, who took him to that same place. Dvadasaditya Tila and worshipped him there, where eventually the famous and first of the Braj Gaudiya movement's major temples was erected. Madhamohan Temple, the original temple, still stands today, and it's one of the more beautiful locations in the Braj that where Madan Gopal appeared and where Sanatana Goswami worshipped him, overviewing the Ganga as it is with at a considerable height. So the point being only with regard to Advaita that he had something to do with bringing Madan Mohan, the deity of Braj, who represents Sambandha Gyan, into the fold of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, where he plays a prominent role along with Govindaji and Gopinath. After that, as I say, Advaita returned to Bengal and Shantipur, and it was there that he made, perhaps connected, I should say, perhaps with his most prominent, who would become his most prominent disciple, and whom he named Haridas, and whom he affectionately referred to as Brahmaharidas. Together, as we'll see, hopefully going forward in this discussion, they both played a significant role in bringing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the world, Advaita and Haridas. But Haridas, of course, was born in a family who conducted themselves outside of the Hindu standards of dharmic or ethical, virtuous life. And at the same time, nonetheless, he had a gravitational pull, if you will, towards Nam Dharma, so much so that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu named him the Nam Acarya eventually. But it was Advaita who took him in and initiated him and understood the complexity of the previous life, if you will, of Haridas, that explained his, what would be from a Hindu point of view, inauspicious birth, yet at the same time, his strong pull towards Vaishnavism and Nam Bhajan, Nam Dharma in particular. And I think that through Haridas and through Advaita's initiation of him and his affectionate and playful reference to him, not only as by his initiated name Haridas, but by referring to him as Brahma Haridas, it's apparent that Advaita had deep insight into the kind of the mystery or the complexities of Haridas's previous life that caused him to appear as he did. And it should be mentioned that Advaita's embrace of Haridas, which was, as I say, comprehensive and affectionate, was something that was brought Advaita, who was, in contrast to Haridas, a very Paka Brahmin and Vaishnav, high quality Brahmin family from the Varnashram point of view, and a Vaishnav of great substance and standing, brought that standing in the minds of Brahmins who didn't understand Vaishnavism as well into question, how he could associate himself so closely with Haridas. And of course, there's the famous story of during the Shraddha ceremony that Advaita performed, perhaps the passing of his own father. The custom was that this is of course a varnashram function in the karma marg, the dharma marg. Vaishnavas will, in householder life in particular, in those times when varnashram was the social system, would observe such activities without any thought that such observance would enhance their bhakti, or any thought that not participating in it would in any way diminish their standing in bhakti, but out of a formality and in consideration of the social times, and to set an example for people who didn't have adhikar for Vaishnavism per se, but should be nonetheless inspired to follow the social religious system of the Hindus. What is his name? Baldev Vijayabhushan refers to this type of Vaishnav as a parinishta Vaishnav. Parinishta. So fully participating in Vaishnavism, but to set an example for others who have yet to attain adhikar for Vaishnavism, they would adhere to the social and religious standards of varnashram. Of course, only as much as they did not conflict, the relative, that is, it did not conflict with the absolute here being the Vaishnav perspective. So anyway, he observed the Shraddha ceremony, and part of the observance was that the offering that was made, the remnants of that would be given to the most qualified Brahmin in the community. And of course, Advaita gave it to Haridas, who wasn't even allowed to participate directly. It was outside paying his obeisances to the community and their religious observance. And this, of course, shocked the Brahmin community, who left, if you will, in protest, and only to find that at home their sacrificial fires could not be lit. And thus, by such a miracle, if you will, came to consider further the position of Advaita and come into some understanding through his grace of his embrace of Haridas, this is very, of course, central to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, the leveling of the playing field, if you will, in terms of the caste systems, hierarchy, and so forth. And Nam Sankirtan being the singular ritual of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, if you will, and available to one and all. Even I remember, it reminds me now, when we installed the Krishna Balaram deities in Vrindavan, which was a big affair. It took 3 days for the Brahmins to perform the various rituals. When it was all over, of course, Prabhupada called for Nam Sankirtan, and he told us it was all done by the Nam Sankirtan. The rest was just a show for the people who thought that all such procedures were necessary. So the embrace on the part of Advaita of Haridas, and as I say, the fact that he referred to him as Brahma Haridas is, of course, interesting, and it leads us to believe that somehow he knew the previous life of Brahma, or excuse me, of Haridas. So that gives us a little bit of an opening, I think, to come to a better understanding, if we pursue how he knew that, better understanding of the ontological position of Advaita Acharya himself. And also, it gives us an opening to discuss, I think, to some extent, the aesthetic or rasic sensibilities of Advaita, so tattva and bhava. We'll enter into the tattva and the bhava, if you will, of Advaita through his embrace of Haridas and his nicknaming him Brahma Haridas. And of course, the idea is that Advaita knew that in the previous life, Haridas had been a Brahma. And as, of course, there are many Brahmas, and Brahma's position, the position of Brahma is attained through Varnashram. It can be through the Karma Marg, it can be attained. It can be attained by Gyanis. Sometimes a Gyani will be elevated to the position of Brahma. Sometimes a devotee. We find in that example, latter example, in the case of Gopakumar in Sanatana Goswami's Brihad Bhagavatamrita, who became a Brahma for some long period of time, if you will, by circumstances. So, of course, Haridas, our Brahma, the four-headed Brahma, was a Vaishnav. His particular position is described as in the Bhagavatam as having received the darshan, antar darshan, internal darshan of Narayan. In Bhagavatam, this is described, who then, if we follow that narrative, as it's also related in Gopal Tapani Upanishad, in the Brahma Samhita, and if we look also carefully at the language of the Bhagavatam, it's clear that while Narayan appeared to him, gave him darshan, God appeared to him, he subsequently showed himself as Gopal Krishna in Gopavesh, in the dress of a cowherd. And it was in that form that he imparted the Gopal mantra to him, which corresponds with Gopal Krishna himself, and also gave him substantial siksha in the form of the 4 essential verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then he disappeared. And it's apparent that Brahma received an extraordinary dispensation from Krishna, Gopal Krishna, again, in the form of initiation. And further also, it's mentioned in the Bhagavatam that he desired, or that, let's say that Gopal Krishna blessed him to pursue the desire to have a relationship with him in fraternal love. Now, that type of relationship is typically, of course, not possible with Narayan. But originally, the Lord appeared as Narayan, showed himself as Gopal, gave the mantra, gave the blessing, and disappeared. And it's apparent that Brahma got a significant installment of grace at the time, but that he had not been able to digest it all at that time, what the significance of all that was. So, of course, he has his abode, and there Narayan, the form of Mahavishnu, is the presiding deity, and he worshipped Narayan in Vaidhi Bhakti, and then, of course, in due course, Krishna manifested his Prakat Leela and brought Brahma to Braj in what's famously known as the Brahma Vimohan Leela. It speaks about the bewilderment of Brahma that caused him to make an offense and to be enlightened at the same time. As to the position of Krishna, where the doubt, perhaps, or the question as to whether Krishna comes from Narayana, Narayana comes from Krishna. It may have looked to him at the beginning as if Krishna is a manifestation of Narayan, Narayan having appeared to him first. So to clear up that point, in the part of his disciple, Krishna, his guru, brought him into the Braj Leela to teach him that I, Gopal Krishna, am the source of Narayan. This is a very significant, important point of tattva, the most important point of tattva, philosophical point in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Because if we know Krishna to be the source of Narayan, or the fountainhead of all forms of divinity, the implication is that the possibilities of love with that particular form exceeds the possibilities that we might find in any other form of the Godhead. So fraternal love, for example, in this case, is possible in Braj, and there in the Brahma Mohan Leela, of course, Brahma, through Krishna's arrangement, was acquainted with all the full face of what Sakyabhav is all about, which was just absolutely mind-blowing to the four-headed Brahma to see how these cowherds interacted with Krishna. And of course, subsequent to his enlightenment, Brahma spoke beautifully, composed on the spot, beautifully, many prayers in glorification of Krishna. And amongst them is a most famous and significant verse that makes clear in no uncertain terms that Brahma realized from what he saw, which of course was ultimately, in terms of the Aishvarya in this Leela, that Narayans were emanating from Krishna. Krishna had manifested himself as all the cowherd boys, and then he showed all the cowherd boys to be forms of himself from whom Narayans and universes were emanating. So to then demonstrate and state through his eulogy that what he had understood and present that to Krishna, one of the many beautiful verses that he composed is central to this point. And it's a verse, of course, that is cited by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. I think it's the 14th verse of the 14th chapter, Brahma's prayers, Brahma Stuti. And there he says, Narayanastvam nahi sarvadehinam, so on. That he, in the context of the verse, he describes that you are Narayan in one sense, and Narayan is, in another sense, is as an anga of you, a limb of you. Mm-hmm. This verse, again, the philosophical point that's being made is that Krishna is the source of Narayan. This comes, of course, in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavatam, the 1st canto, in the one line, Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam, that the whole Krishna Sandarbha is about. But in the context of the Leela narrative, in the Brahma Mohan Leela, this point is established. And here's a verse then in Brahma's prayers that says as much in an extended sense, because Krishna's tu Bhagavan Swayam is a very short line, and not everybody understands the implications of it. Therefore, Jiva Goswami saw fit to write a whole Sandarbha. But in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also takes up the argument that Krishna is the source of Narayan in the 2nd chapter of the Adi Leela, and he cites this verse. And he actually tells us that this verse, he says, a shloka, this shloka, Tatpalakshan Bhagavat Sar, is the essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam from the point of view of tattva. Paribas rupe, inhar, something. Sarva tattva adhikar. So, sarva tradhikar, he says. Paribas rupe inhar. Ajita Goswami uses a similar term. He says Paribhas Sutra. So this is a little extended. This verse is an extended form of Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam that we find in the Bhagavatam, and it is the essence of the tattva of Srimad Bhagavatam. So what's being said here, of course, again, is that Krishna is the source of Narayan, and further that Narayan is an anga, a vilas, manifestation for play, for lila, of Krishna. And while Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami cites this verse in the second canto, second chapter of the Adi Lila, he also cites it in the third chapter, where he identifies Advaita with the anga, that is Narayana, that Brahma is speaking about, who was his worshipable deity in Brahmaloka. So Advaita, in the form of Narayan, was the worshipable deity in Vaidhi Bhakti of Brahma, that he passed through coming into Braj by Krishna's arrangement, and turned then from Vaidhi Bhakti, as Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur comments in the chapters of Brahma and Mohan Lila, to Rag Bhakti. And then in the sixth chapter of the Adi Lila of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is Krishnadas's chapter about Advaita Charya. He cites two verses there that are verses from his Mangalacharan, and then he explains those verses in that chapter. There again, he cites this verse and identifies Advaita with this anga of Narayan, whom he further explains is one of two particular manifestations of Narayan, and in the form of Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu is the avatar of Narayan. He's also referred to as Narayan. And of course, he is the generator of the world Leela, Shrishti Leela. We know that by his will, in the form of kind of a metaphorical glance, consciousness is impregnated into the womb of material nature. But Krishnadas tells us an interesting, gives us some interesting information that I have not found anywhere else. And this was with regard to Advaita. He says that not only does this Narayan, Mahavishnu, create the world by glancing, but material nature is so inert, so incapable of giving rise to consciousness. If you want to look at reductive materialism and the idea that consciousness is a product of matter, well, Chaitanya Charitamrita very strongly disagrees. Not only does matter require the seed of the glance of consciousness from Narayan, but prior to that, it also requires the energy of the Godhead just to be fertile enough to receive the seed of consciousness. And so Krishnadas Kaviraj says there's two forms of Narayan. One who gives the seed, and one who prior to that energizes and kind of, we would say, makes fertile material nature to receive the seed of consciousness such that the creation may proceed. I think it's, in one sense, this explanation of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is a way of making a underscoring or underlining the idea that Sankhya philosophy of the atheist Kapila is something that Gaudiya Vedanta disagrees with regard to the Sankya's explanation of the creative power within nature itself. So, having cited this verse again of Brahmas from the Brahma Vimohan Lila in the 6th chapter, and identifying Advaita with this particular form of Narayan, it's clear why, I guess we could say, that Brahma, or that Advaita, understood the past of Haridas. He was the Narayan that he was worshiping, who's the expansion of Krishna for pleasure pastimes, and in this case, the pastime, of course, refers to the material world, its creation, which is thought to be nothing other than just out of joy. I think we can say clearly, and this is supported in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that it's also tied to the will of Narayan and Vaikuntha, the desire of Narayan and Vaikuntha to express compassion. The idea is that the world is not needed. Nothing is needed by Narayan. He's full, but compassion is a sign of fullness and an overflowing, so to speak. So it's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Narayan and Vaikuntha revels in amongst the muktas, but desires also to bestow mukti, which you can't do in Vaikuntha. Everybody has it. So, along with Narayan, of course, the Chaturyuha, the second Chaturyuha, is there in Vaikuntha, and manifesting from Baladev, the Mahasankarshan. Mahasankarshan takes the cue of Narayan, if you will. The will to bestow mukti, to relish compassion, and as a result manifests from Baladev, Mahasankarshan, manifests the Mahavishnu. Again, and he takes these two forms, and this is the worshipable deity, principally at first, of Narayan, whom Advaita is identified with. So we find then, again, through the story, if you will, of Advaita's embrace of Haridas and referring to him as Brahma Haridas, we've explored something about the ontological position of Advaita. He is a very, in a way, the very personification of the compassion of Narayan. And we find him in the Leela of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, longing for the deliverance of the jivas of the world. And very much driven by that. But this, of course, is somewhat, as extraordinary and spiritual as it is, somewhat external to the internal reality of Advaita. At the same time, with regard to the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu yet to come, by his own, Advaita's own call, with the help, as I say, of Haridas, which we'll come to. What I'm saying is, what is the position of Advaita then in relation to the Braja Leela? He's God, he's Narayan, he's full of compassion, he's in a personified form, if you will, of the compassion of Narayan. And the answer to the question as to the standing in spiritual aesthetics or rasa of Advaita comes from a couple of places. And when we look at those places, they tie us into the fact, they connect us with the fact that, of course, that Haridas as we were describing, is not only initiated by Narayan and then, or excuse me, by Krishna, worshiped Narayan, developed Rag Bhakti, and the full pursuit of Sakyabhav. So what does Advaita have to do with that internal side of Brahmharidas? And well, as I mentioned, Mahavishnu is the avatar of Sankarshan, who is Baladev and Vaikuntha. There, of course, he's more in a Dasya role, but of course, Baladev himself is the personification of Sakyarasa. But Kavi Karnapur, in his famous book, Gorgona Deshdipika, has identified Advaita with Narayan, also known as Sadashiva, another name for him. And in the context of doing so, has referred to the Shiva Tantra, wherein it's stated that Shiva, Sadashiva, saw the dancing of Krishna and Balaram along with their friends in Braj, and desired to participate in that same dancing. And as such, Krishna allowed him, blessed him, and he manifested a separate form while remaining in the form of Sadashiva, a separate form as a cowherd boy, and relished, tasted Sakyabhava. So from that point of view, looking at it from that angle, we see that Advaita was also a fitting guru for Sakyaras, the Sakyaras of Brahmharidas. And together then, of course, this guru and disciple, Advaita and Haridas, as I say, they brought about the manifestation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the world, the unfolding of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela. And interestingly, while Advaita is identified with the bringing of Mahaprabhu in terms of his Vaidhi Bhakti dispensation of the Yuga Dharma, by puja of the Shalagram Shila with Tulsi and Gangajal. This is a Vaidhi Bhakti-esque type of typical worship. Through this worship, Advaita called and brought Krishna himself, Swami Bhagavan, to the world in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to do the work of the Yuga Dharma. That means to participate in the breadth of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dispensation, the wide spreading of this. It's interesting to note, of course, also that the wide dispensation of Gaudiya Vaishnavism that Advaita desired was further facilitated by Nityananda Prabhu. And Sakyaras is very, by nature, very prone to empathy and pathos. I've mentioned before that with regard to the empathy and pathos for the inhabitants of Vrindavan on the part of Krishna, after he had left, he sent first Uddhava to counsel them. Uddhava's in Dasiras mixed with Sakyaras. When he comes to Braj, his Sakyaras takes precedence, and he shows he's a somewhat suitable person to empathize with the inhabitants of Braj. Later on, of course, he sent Baladev, who was much more capable to empathize with them. When Krishna was in Mathura and he had to send his friends back, it was through them that he told, you Sridham, deliver this letter to my mother, speak to her. You, Subal, speak to the gopis, and carry with you the burden not only of your own separation, but the burden of mitigating their separation, those in Vatsalya Rasa, those in Madhurya Rasa, those in Dasya Rasa, as well. So, at any rate, for the dispensation, wide-scale dispensation of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, again, we see Nityananda Prabhu, wide distribution, Prabhupada, wide distribution. But while Advaita, I'm saying, brought Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for this purpose, at the same time, it's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Haridas, through his Nam Bhajan, while Advaita was doing puja of Shaligram, and then Haridas was doing Nam Bhajan. Now the two are classically, typically identified, the former Shaligram Puja with Vaidhi Bhakti and Nam Bhajan with Rag Bhakti. So while Advaita brought Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for the work of the Yuga Avatar, at the same time, Haridas, we can say, based on Chaitanya Charitamrita, had something to do with bringing him in terms of his internal purpose, to give Rag Bhakti and so on to the world. So these two have given us, brought Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the world. And the one, Haridas, of course, is the Brahma of Gaur Leela. And Advaita is the Sadashiva, which means he's Vishnu, but he's also Shiva. So it's mentioned in Bhagavatam. Shiva Nichnutam Sharanyam. The two, Haridas and Advaita, are the Brahma and Shiva of, and I suppose you could say the Brahma, Shiva, and the Vishnu of Gaur Leela. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as Krishna, the source of Advaita as well, which, of course, Advaita, in the context of Leela, went out of his way also to establish this point, this verse of Brahma's, Narayanastvam Nahisarvadehina. Oh, the Krishna, Narayan is but your avatar, an anga of you. Apparently, Advaita liked this verse very much, as Narayan, spoken by his disciple Brahma. He celebrated the idea. Yes, you have the blessing for Sakirasa in the Braja Leela. So he, in the context of the Leela, we know Advaita went out of his way to establish that Krishna, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Krishna Chaitanya Nimai Pandit, was his worshipable deity. This was peculiar, of course, because Advaita, as I said in the beginning, was 50 years older than Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and most venerable, worshipable Vaishnava outside of Madhavendra Puri, for example, in the whole of Nadia, where he would hold Bhagavatam discourse, Bhagavad Gita discourse, and very powerfully establish the superiority of bhakti over jnana. So the extent to which Advaita went out of his way to establish in the minds of others, amongst the associates, that while it appeared he was senior and a worshipable deity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, being Krishna himself, was the worshipable deity of Narayan. Ekala Ishwar Krishna, Ar Sapritya. So Ekala Ishwar, there's only one, this is a nice statement of Chaitanya Charitamrita. There's only one Ishwar, that's Krishna. Everyone else, including all the expansions, all the avatars, or to speak of all the jivas, are Britya, are servants. And of course, it is in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela that this point is brought out more clearly than anywhere else. It's also there in Krishna Leela. We find Narayan wanted to have the darshan of Krishna and Arjuna, and brought them to his abode through his stealing of the sons of the Brahmin that Arjuna vowed to bring back and so forth. And when he failed, then was going to commit suicide, but Krishna said, no, come with me. And they went to Mahavishnu's lok and gave him darshan. But more clearly in Chaitanya Charitamrita, and here that same Mahavishnu as Advaita is pointing this out. And how strongly, as I say, while he was so well known for his championing of bhakti based on the scriptures, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, he began to teach that Gyan was superior to bhakti and give that type of interpretation of the sacred text, so that the word would go to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would come and correct him, and being corrected by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would have established, oh, see, he is my teacher. And boy, did he correct him. He gave him a slap, knocked the old man Advaita over. And Sita was so concerned. He's an old man now. But he rebounded very well and celebrated joyously that now, before everybody, it's clear. You are my worshipable deity. You have corrected me. So such is the position of Advaita, how he must have relished his Brahma Haridas's verse. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has cited it to tell us that, help us to solve a little bit the mystery of Brahma Haridas. And it was just a mystery how he could be even embraced by Advaita on the part of the Brahmins and Vaishnavas at the time. But there's much more to it, as we see. So Advaita Charja ki jai, Shri Haridas Thakur ki jai. So here's a few words about Advaita. Does anyone have any questions, comments they'd like to put forward? Look on the comment section. Don't see anything there yet. Of course, we should mention that Sadashiva is a complex person, so he's well known in Gaudiya Vaishnavism also for wanting to relish Madhurya Rasa and such he's been Gopeshwar. But relative to today's class, I've emphasized the Sakya-rasa side. Otherwise, largely in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has emphasized the dasya of dasya bhakti of Advaita. And this is a very nice chapter where you get a view of the Vaikuntha perspective. All the rasas are coming out of dasya. That's how it would be viewed. And the Krishna Leela would be manifest in Vaikuntha, for example, on Janmashtami. Ryan shows the Krishna Leela, and here's the dasya and sakya, but solely not something that the residents can participate in, but something that Narayan manifests in a special show with expressions of his own self in the form of cowherds and gopis and so on and so forth. But all these are really, when properly understood, Dasaras. That's the perspective in Vaikuntha. And this is the perspective that is shared by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in the 6th chapter of Adi Leela when he discusses the Dasya of Advaita. We get a view of Dasya Bhakti in Vaikuntha. But he's multidimensional, as we say, and certainly in the context of Gaur Leela, he has some access, some participation in the Braj Leela. Now I see one question here. As the material universe corresponds with Sankarshan's desire to give mukti, do the Vaikuntha worlds correspond with some desire of Shri Krishna? Well, I believe it's the desire of Narayan, as I mentioned, that's then facilitated in Vaikuntha, that's facilitated as a aside here to your question by Mahasankarshan, who manifests as Mahavishnu. But your question, as it should be, Narayan desires to give mukti. Do the Vaikuntha worlds then in some way correspond? Can you hear me? Yeah, you can correspond with the manifestation of Vaikuntha. So as in Vaikuntha, there's a desire that corresponds with the material world. Does Vaikuntha in some way correspond with the desire in Braj? Well, I mean, it corresponds with, I mean, the fact that there are devotees who have that type of approach, that type of love. So there has to be a world for them. It's a type of love, the Aishvarya, the Dasya Bhakti of Vaikuntha, the Shantarasa of Vaikuntha, both. But I don't think can't think offhand of anything in particular that really corresponds in the way that the question is being asked. A moment. I mean, for example, there's a moment in the Braja Leela that gives rise to the Prakat Leela of Krishna. That's, of course, that, and also the manifestation of Gaur Leela. But as far as the necessity corresponding with the desire, if you will, to manifest the Vaikuntha worlds, I can't think of anything that resembles that. Let's see. We have another question. We have a question in Spanish, Maharaj, from, looks like Kali Pavanadas. Sí. Right. Sometimes it's said that the Maha in his name refers to Shiva, Mahadev, Maha and Vishnu, Mahavishnu. It is a little bit theologically complex, so I appreciate your question. But that said, the term Sadashiva is thought to be synonymous with Mahavishnu. While at the same time, the Mahavishnu is creating the world, so to speak, and his glance is Shambhu, Shiva, is an aspect of himself. So we can see that the Shiva aspect is part of Mahavishnu. At the same time, there is a Shiva Loka. That's kind of at the bottom of Vaikuntha, so to speak. And this is described in Brihad Bhagavatamrita and other places as well. And there, the Mahavishnu is present as Sadashiva. So, and there he's always dancing, it said, in abandon, singing about the Braj Leela, Krishna, in Braj. So, this Sadashiva is another expression of Mahavishnu. Aside from his presiding over the material world, he has a loka where the Shiva side of himself is more prominent, if you will. Therefore, he's described as Sadashiva. So you have the Rudras and there are many different types of manifestations of Shiva. Sadashiva is the original Shiva, and he's Bhagwan in a distilled kind of form. So Sadashiva and Mahavishnu are one. And if you were to look at it, you'd say more that Shiva is an aspect of Narayan, not that Narayan is an aspect, or Mahavishnu, or that not that Shiva, not that Narayan is an aspect of Mahavishnu. So if that helps. What else? Any other question? Okay, thank you for that one. So I guess that helped. All right, well, it's nice to speak with you all on this auspicious occasion. Hopefully you'll be celebrating it in your own homes and temples with your own friends and family members. Sri Advaita Saptami ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Premanande.
His Divine Grace Bhaktivedanta Tripurari Swami Guru Maharaj ki jai. Oh my gosh, that was
Hare Krishna, beautiful devotees. We'll see everybody. Father, whoever can come on Saturday to the memorial for Karnamrita, that would be very nice. And then Sunday we'll have Q&A, and then next Thursday, is it? We have next the 25th will be Nityananda's Parents' Day. Oh, and tomorrow, Pamanava Swami will be giving his Vaishnava etiquette class, which he usually does on Mondays and Thursdays, but he didn't want us to lose a day today. So class tomorrow at 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. All right. Thank you all for coming and joining us on this very auspicious day. And we'll see everybody soon. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.